You know, sometimes a single person's grueling fight for survival, just navigating the court system, ends up creating a legal rule that affects millions. So today, we're going to dive into a case from 1989 that did exactly that. It all comes down to one simple but really powerful question. When it comes to justice, is there a deadline?
And this is the line from the Andhra Pradesh High Court that just stops you in your tracks. A woman had been fighting for years to get the financial support she was owed, and the court's final answer was she could only claim 1 year's worth. I mean, that sounds incredibly harsh, maybe even unfair. So you have to wonder, how on earth did they arrive at that conclusion?
That's the central puzzle we're going to solve in this explainer. We're going to follow one woman's long, frustrating battle and see how it led to this landmark legal principle that's still shaping decisions today. Okay, so our story kicks off back in October 1985. Jangam Rajeswari had been deserted by her husband, and the court granted her what was supposed to be a lifeline to help her survive, 130 rupees a month. Now, this wasn't some suggestion, it was a legal command.
But here's the thing. That court order, it might as well have been invisible. For years, her husband, Srinivasa Rao, just ignored it. He paid absolutely nothing. So for Rajeswari, that lifeline was just an illusion, and it forced her into this incredibly long and frustrating legal fight just to get what she was already owed.
Wow. I mean, just look at this timeline. It really shows you what a legal maze Rajeswari had to go through. Talk about persistence. She files her initial application way back in '83, and 2 years later, she's finally granted maintenance. But when she tries to enforce the order, it gets wrongly dismissed. She tries again, and believe it or not, it gets dismissed again. It's not until 1988 that a higher court finally steps in and says, hey, yeah, her original order is still valid. So after all that, she files a third time to try and collect 50 months of back pay, and that is what finally sends this whole thing to the high court.
So, after 5 long years of fighting in the lower courts, the whole mess lands on the desk of Justice D.J. Raju. And he wasn't just looking at one woman's claim anymore, he was staring at a tangled legal mess that had huge implications for how maintenance laws would be handled all across the country.
To cut through all the confusion, Justice Raja boiled the whole problem down to 3 crucial questions. First off, was Rajeswari's original maintenance order even still valid after those bizarre dismissals? Second, and this is the real kicker, is there a time limit on how much back pay a person can actually claim? And finally, the husband had, at last, made a payment. How is that money supposed to be counted against the debt?
All right, so that first question, Justice Raju shut it down and fast. His answer was an emphatic no. A magistrate who is just there to enforce an order has no power to cancel it. That power is reserved for very specific situations. So the bottom line was Rajeswari's order was valid, and it had been valid the entire time.
And that brings us to the real heart of the matter. Just because the order was valid, did that mean she could collect on all 50 months of that unpaid maintenance? Or was there some kind of limit? This was the exact question that had been dividing other courts for years.
So Justice Raju found himself at a legal crossroads with 2 previous court decisions pointing in totally opposite directions. On one side, you had a case called Madhuri Bin, which argued that the law's 1-year time limit applies to everything, whether it's seizing property or sending someone to jail. But then you had the Iftikhar Hussain case, which said no, that 1-year limit only applies to seizing property. This meant you could, in theory, send someone to jail for an unlimited amount of back pay. 2 completely different takes.
So what do you do when the law seems to contradict itself like that? Well, judges have a tool for this, and it's a principle called harmonious construction. The idea is actually pretty simple. You can't just read one part of a law by itself. You have to look at all of its parts together to make sure your final interpretation is logical and consistent, not something totally absurd.
So, using that principle, Justice Raju took a step back and looked at the whole point of the maintenance law in the first place. He reasoned that its main goal is to provide a speedy remedy for a current necessity, for things like food and shelter right now. It was never designed to be a tool for someone to just let debt pile up for years and years and then collect a giant lump sum later on. And that line of thinking led him straight to his landmark ruling. He sided with the logic from the Madhuri Bin case. He declared that an application to enforce a maintenance order can only be for the money that piled up in the 12 months right before the application was filed. And just like that, the 1-year rule was established.
In this new rule, it neatly solved that third and final puzzle about the payment. Remember, the husband had paid 3,250 rupees during the case. The court ruled that this money had to be applied to the debt that was legally recoverable, and under this brand new one-year rule, that meant it could only go towards the debt from the most recent 12 months.
So, when the dust settled, who actually won? Well, this table lays it out pretty clearly. It was complicated. Rajeswari, the wife, she got a big win on the first point. Her maintenance order was declared valid. But Srinivasa Rao, the husband, he ended up winning on the two other crucial points. The 12-month limit was real, and his payment covered that entire period. It was truly a split decision.
So what did this actually mean in real life for these two people? For the husband, his 350-day jail sentence was poof, gone. For Rajeswari, her right to get maintenance in the future was confirmed. But after fighting for 5 long years, she could only collect 1 year of back pay. To get the rest of the money she was owed, her only option was to start a brand new, and likely years-long, civil lawsuit. I mean, you can just imagine how crushing that must have felt.
But even though the outcome for Rajeswari herself was so tough, her long and difficult journey had a massive ripple effect. This single decision managed to cut through years of legal confusion and created a clear, uniform standard for all of India.
So why are we still talking about a case from 1989? Because this one-year rule is still a huge deal in family law today. It stops claims from piling up forever, which could be used unfairly. It pushes people who need support to act quickly. It draws a really clear line in the sand for what judges can and cannot do. And ultimately, it tries to strike a balance between getting people immediate help and making sure the legal process stays fair.
And all of this leaves us with one final big thought. This case really forces us to ask a fundamental question about justice itself. When you put a time limit on a legal right, is that a necessary safeguard to keep the system fair and efficient? Or is it a barrier that can stop a deserving person from getting what they are truly owed? As this case shows, there's no simple answer.